तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ आप्यायन्तु ममाङ्गानि वाक्प्राणश्चक्षुश्रोत्रमथ बलमिन्द्रियाणि च सर्वाणि ब्रह्म उपनिषदम् माहं ब्रह्म निराकुर्याम् मा ब्रह्म निराकरोत् अनिराकरणमस्त्वनिराकरणं मे अस्तु तदात्मनि निरते यौपनिषत्सु धर्मास्ते मयि सन्तु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। ओमित्येतदक्षरमुद्गीतमुपासीत ओमिति ह्युद्गायते तस्योपव्याख्यानम् on the page 519, going to the next adhikaranam. Says in Nyaya Nirnaya, पूर्वेषु अधिकरणेषु महाभूतानां पूर्वस्मात् उत्तरस्य सृष्टिः उपदिष्टा। पूर्वेषु अधिकरणेषु, in the previous adhikaranas, previous topics, पूर्वस्मात् आकाशाद् वायुः अग्नेः आपः. From each previous one, उत्तरस्य सृष्टि उपदिष्टा, that it is established that akashad vayuhu, atmanah akashah, of course from atma akasha is created. Akashad vayuhu, from akasha space, vayu the air, from vayu agni apah adbyah prithvi. From each previous one the following mahabhuta or great element is created. This is what is established in the adhikarana so far. Samprati bhutanam swakarya swatantriyat. So now the question is, when it said akashad vayuhu, from akasha vayu is created. Is it akasha that created vayu, or is it Brahman that created vayu? Who is the creator of these elements, one after the other? Bhutanam swasvakarya swatantriyat. One, the Purva Paksha is that Bhutanam Swakare Swatantrayat. That this each element also is Swatantra, is independent in creating its own product. Does not require Brahman. Akash itself can create Vayu and so forth. Brahmanah Sarvakarata Shruti Virodha Syat. Then Brahman is the material cause, the efficient cause of everything. That Shruti will be contradicted because Akasha is the creator, Vayu is the creator, that Brahman is not required, that Brahman is the cause of everything, that Shruti would be contradicted. Etasmat jayate prana manas sarvendriyani cha. So from Brahman alone, prana, manah, everything is born, all the five elements. Tad jalaniti, tad jalan. From Brahman alone is janma, and then the breathing or sustenance, and the laya, the dissolution. Tad sushtva tadevanu pravishata. So kamayata bahusyam prajayeti satapotapyata satapastutva idagum sarvam asrujata. Brahman created all of this. So there are many Shruti statements which say that Brahman is the cause of the universe. Whereas it looks as though from this statement, Akashad Vayuhu, Vayuhu Agnihi, from this statement looks as though the space created the air and air created the fire. Then Brahman did not create. Then Brahman cannot say to be the cause of all. Iti Ashankya. All along in all these adhikaranas, the basic Purva-paksha is that different Shruti statements appear to contradict each other. If there is internal contradiction in the Shruti itself, then Shruti cannot be Pramanam. A Pramanam or means of knowledge must be consistent, must say the same thing. Eyes cannot say one thing here and somewhere something else elsewhere. Cannot say this orange now, after 5 minutes says it is red. It can't be. And so Shruti cannot say that Brahman is the cause of all and elsewhere say that Akasha is the cause. Internal contradiction. In that case, Shruti no more becomes reliable. That's what Purva-paksha all along wants to show. Then there is an Ekadeshi. Ekadeshi means the pseudo-Vedantin, who says, no, the contradiction is not there. One of the Shruti is primary, other Shruti is Gauni or secondary. So this pseudo-Vedantin is a Vedantin, wants to establish the Pramanyam, the authenticity of the Shruti. But by saying that one statement is primary, other statement is secondary. So even though Taittiriya says that Akasha asambhutaha, Akasha was created, says no, Akasha is not really created in a Gauna sense, in a secondary sense it is said. So that also is not acceptable to us. Siddhanti wants to say that all the Shruti statements are to be taken in a primary sense, and even after taking them in a primary sense, they do not contradict each other. So we have to understand those statements rather than dismiss some of them as secondary. So this is the trend of discussion in all of this. Purva-paksha is there, Ekadeshi gives a solution, then Vedanta then brings the Mukhya Siddhanta. Or if you look at the Ratnaprabha, Samprati Tani Bhutani Ashritya. Now the resolution is done about the 5 elements. Samprati Tani Bhutani Ashritya. Now, resorting to the same five elements. आश्रय आश्रय भाव संगत्या तेषाम स्वातंत्रम आशंक्य निषेधति. Ratnaprabha says that this sangati, the relationship, sambandha between the previous adhikarana and all adhikarana that talked about the five elements, and this adhikarana is ashraya ashrayi. That five elements become the basis for doubt. Those very five elements become the ashraya, the basis for the doubt. So ashraya, ashray bhava sangati. The what is discussed in earlier adhikaranas themselves become the basis for the doubt. Tisham swatantram ashankya. Same thing. That those elements are independent in creating their products. Nishedati, first Shanka is presented, then Nisheda, the doubt is resolved or refuted. So let us read the next sutra. Tat abhidhyanadevato tad lingat saha. In this sutra, the karta is saha, although it is last, Saha, this is the pratigna. Saha is pratigna, what? Parameshwaraha. So, Parameshwaraha eva srujati. Parameshwareva tattat karyam srujati. Saha. Saha Parameshwaraha eva tattat karyam srujati. That Parameshwara alone creates each one of these effects or products. Parameshwara creates space and air and fire, etc. So that's the pratigna. Why do you say that? Tat abhidhyana. How does he do that? Tat abhidhyana deva srujati. Abhidhyana means ikshanam. Tat aikshata. Ikshanam, deliberation. They call it deep meditation. Sat tapo tapyata. Sat tapas taptva. Sometimes called ikshanam, kamana, tapah, deep meditation. The idea is that creation presupposes a meditation. When you want to create anything, you have to reflect upon what it is that you want to create, and why do you want to create, and how you are going to create. Even before making a cup of tea also, you deliberate as to what it is that you want to do tea. Why? Because 6:30 in the morning. How? All of that is first deliberated. Now, if you do that every day, you may not need a great amount of time to deliberate, but quickly that happens in the mind. That whole process of creation becomes, first of all, established in the mind, deliberated in the mind, and accordingly you create. Any action presupposes a deliberation like that, particularly action of creation, because in this case, the universe is to be created in keeping with the model of the previous kalpa or previous cycle, in keeping with the karma, the actions of all the jivas. So all of that has to be deliberated. So tat abhidhyanadeva, by deep meditation or reflection alone, that Parameshwara alone created. Tat tatkari gochara ikshanatmaka abhidhyanadeva. What is tat tatkari gochara? Whatever Ishvara wants to create, first he deliberates about space and then creates space. Tadaikshata bahusyam prajaya tat tejah asrujata. Then it deliberated, may I become many, may be born, and with that deliberation created the element fire. Tadaikshata again, bahusyam praja, etc., etc., Then that fire deliberated, created water, etc. So tat karya. Before creating any karya, next step, there is a deliberation. Always, that's what we do. When they make this building, at every step there is a deliberation how the next step is going to be. So tat aikshata, who is that tat? Ikshata bhuta adhisthata san. Tat always is Parameshvara. That Parameshvara being the adhisthata, being the very locus of that deliberation, the Parameshvara has deliberated at every stage and created. Why do you say that? So, tat abhidhyanadeva saha srujati. Kasmat. Kutah. On what basis do you say that? Tallingat. That is the hetu. Tallingat tasya paramatmanah sarva niyantritva rupa lingasya shutatvat. Because elsewhere Shruti says how that Paramatma is the niyanta of everybody. The idea is that the karta also must be niyanta. The creator also must be the ruler. And only Parameshvara is seen, heard to be. The Shruti says Parameshvara is the only antaryami, only inner ruler. There is no other inner ruler, no other antaryami. So, Sarva Niyantru, he is the Sarva Niyanta, the ruler of all. Where Yah Prasivyam Tishtan, who remaining within the Prasivi, etc. So, is the Niyanta of the Prasivi, Antasan Yamayati. Thus, the Antaryami Brahmana describes Parameshvara as the Antaryami, the inner ruler of everything in the universe. Therefore, he is only creator and nobody else. Therefore, ataha bhutanam Parameshvara adhisthitana eva srashtritva pratipadakatvena. So, even though it may look as though the space created, what is meant is that Antaryami, Paramatma, who is the very self of that space, he creates. Or Paramatma, who has attained the state of the space, he creates the Vayu. So everywhere the creator is only Paramatma. Look at the Vaiyasika Nyayamala. Vyomadhyaha, see there are two verses there. Vyomadhyaha karyakartaro brahmavatat upadhikam. Vyomno vayur vayutognihi ityukte khadi ukte khadikartrata. So, first of all, the Vishaya. And then Samshaya. So, 5 elements become the Vishaya. Vyomadhyaha, the 5 elements beginning Vyoma, the space, Karyakartaraha, do these elements create the subsequent products? Brahmava tadupadikam, or is it Brahman having the upadhi of that element creates? So, is it space that creates or Brahman which has attained the state of the space that Brahman creates? That's a doubt. Vyomno vayuhu vayuta agnihiti uktehe. But the Upanishad says, Akashad vayuhu, from the space the air is created, from the air fire is created, etc. Doesn't say Parameshvara created. It says from Vayu the Agni came, therefore Khadikartruta. Purva Pakshi says that it is the five elements which themselves created. Then the next verse says, Ishvara antaryamati iti uktehe vyomadi upadikam brahma vayavadi hetu syat. Ishvara antaryamati. Ishvara is the inner ruler. Iti uktehe. So that's what the Upanishad says. Therefore, vyomadi upadikam brahma. Brahman, which is the vyomadi upadikam. Brahman, which is the space, air, etc. is the upadi. So Brahman is Atma. Brahman, which is Atma of the each element. Vayavadi hetu, that Brahman is the hetu, the cause of the subsequent product. One. And Tej Adi Ikshanadapi. Second is that the creator is also Ikshita. Creator is the one who deliberates. So deliberation is possible only for Chetana, not Achetana. For that reason also we say that it is Parameshvara who is the creator. Says here, Purvadikarneshu Purva Karyopadikat Brahmana Uttarottara Karyotpattihi iti yadeta siddhavat siddhantitam. In the previous Adhikarana discussion, it was taken that Brahman created, taken for granted. So, siddhavat kritya, as though it is already established that Brahman alone, as space, as air, created. And therefore, Brahman, which has attained the state of element, so like space, creates the element, air, etc. So this is, you have not proven this. You have made a statement that Brahman at each state creates the subsequent product. Siddhantitam, so that's the Siddhanta. Tadayuktam, that's not right. So that becomes the ashraya for this doubt, Why akasad vayuhu vayu agni ityadu brahma nirapekshat kevala vyomadehe uttar karyotpatti shravanat. So when it says akasad vayuhu, from space vayu, vayu agni, from vayu the fire, there brahma nirapekshat, it isn't a Brahman created, so these elements seem to have created independent of Brahman. That's what so the question is how to interpret these statements. Akasad vayuhu, vayuhu agnihi, what should we understand from that? If you just look at the literal meaning, then looks like the space created air and air created fire, independent of Brahman. Therefore, your Siddhanta that Brahman created everything is just you taken for granted, not proven. Siddhavat kritya, as it is already established. Iti prapte brumaha. So when this situation arises, this is what we have to say. Ya akasham antaro yamayati, yo vayum antaro yamayati, ityadina antaryami brahmane vyomadehe swatantram nivaritam. The antaryami brahmana says, Ya akasham antaro yamayati, one who being within akasha rules the akasha. Being Prithvi, within the Prithvi, he is a Niyanta, the controller, the ruler of Prithvi, ruler of water, fire, air, space, everything. Meaning that the Prithvi is not independent. Prithvi is Prithvi because of the internal ruler. So nothing is independent, the internal ruler is everywhere, and that ruler makes sure that everything is what it is, maintains the order. Therefore, Prithvi does not have the freedom to act in whatever way it likes. It is ruled by the Antaryami. Accordingly, Prithvi conducts itself, the water conducts itself, all the elements of nature conduct themselves, none of them is independent. So, Vyomade Swatantram Nivaritam. The independence of these elements has been refuted, has been denied. Then, Yatha Tat Tejah Aikshata Aikshata Ta Apah Aikshantayati Tejah Adehe Ikshanapurakam Sastutvam Shruyate. Tat Tejah Aikshata, the element fire deliberated. Taha Apaha Aikshanta, the water deliberated. Looks like they deliberated independently. Iti Teja Adehe Ikshanapurukam Srashtutvam Shruyate. Shruti seems to say that the creation took place by deliberation on the part of these elements. Tatchaikshanam. Is it possible for the element fire to deliberate? Chetana Brahma Nirupekshanam Achetananam na sambhavati. The dikshanam, deliberation also, is not possible on the part of the insentient. Only sentient entity can deliberate, a live entity can deliberate, a lifeless entity cannot deliberate, a table and chair cannot deliberate. Therefore, Brahma Nirupekshanam Achetananam, independent Brahman, the Achetana, the insentient, cannot deliberate. So, even deliberation also is because of Brahman. So, even though it says fire deliberated, it is Brahman, which is the self of fire, deliberated. Tasmat Vyomadi Upadikasya Brahmaneva Karanatvam. Therefore, Brahman, with those respective Upadi of Vyoma, etc., is the cause of creation. So now we go to the Bhashya here, page 519. Sri Ratnabhava Ukta Bhutani Ashritya Samshaya Purapakshau Darshayati. Ukta Bhutani Ashritya. Those five elements are the Ashraya, the very Vishaya, the subject matter. Samshaya Purapakshau. What is Samshaya? What is Purupaksha? Bhashyakara first shows that Kim Imani Ityadina. Or if you look at Nyaya Nirnay, Vishaya Pradashana Purvakam Akashadi Shabdanam Chetana Achetana Vishayatvabhyam Sandeha Muktva Purupaksham Grunnati. Vishaya Pradashana Purvakam. First Vishaya, the five elements, Bhashyakara says. Akashadi Shabdanam Chetana Achetana Vishayatvabhyam. Whether this space, etc., Akasha, is a sentient entity or insentient. That is the Sandeha here. The doubt is whether, because the Sankhya say that the Pradhanam creates. So Sankhya's claim that Pradhanam, the primordial matter, has the intelligence to create. And the Vedantin's argument is that insentient cannot create. The creation presupposes deliberation, it presupposes knowledge, it presupposes desire. All of these have the locus in a conscious being, not in unconscious being. So let us read the Bhashya. Kim imani vyedadini bhutani स्वयमेव स्वविकारान् सृजन्ति आहुस्वित परमेश्वर एव तेन तेन आत्मना अवतिष्ठमानः अविध्यायन् तं तं विकारं सृजते इति संदेहे सति प्राप्तं तावत् स्वयमेव सृजन्तीति. So Vishaya, Samshaya and Purvapaksha, all the three are stated in this sentence. Kim imani vedadini bhutani. So what was discussed are the five elements in the previous adhikarana, these five elements. Then Swayameva Svavikaran Srijanti. How is it Parmeshwara eva? What's the ground of the doubt? Swayameva Svavikaran Srijanti. Do each of these elements themselves independently create the following elements, following products? Ahosvita Parameshwareva Tena Tena Atmana Avatishtamana. Or Parameshwara obtaining a space, Parameshwara obtaining a air, Parameshwara obtaining as fire. Tena Tena Atmana Avatishtamana. So what you see is Akasha, but Parameshwar is the very Atma of the Akasha. Akasha is the Upadhi. Like this body mind is the Upadhi, but Parameshwar is the Atma of this individual. Similarly, Parameshwar is the Atma of the sentient and insentient, whatever there is. So Antaryami Brahmana says, not only Parameshwara is the Antaryami of sentient beings, Parameshwara is the Antaryami, the inner ruler of all the inner things also. Whether it's Prithvi, whether it's Apaha, Agnihi, whatever it is, Surya, Chandra, all of these are taken one by one and shown how Parameshwara is the inner ruler. So that Parameshwara, who obtains the self of every element, avidhyayan, with deliberation, that Parameshwara creates or the elements create. Tam Sujiti Sandehe Sati, that doubt is there. And what's the Purvapaksha? Praptam Tavat Swayameva Srujanti. Purvapaksha says Swayameva Srujanti. These elements independently, independent of Brahman, they create. Says न्याय निर्णय पूर्व पक्षे श्रुत्योः विरोधात् अनेक वाक्यत्वात् न तत्र ब्रह्मणि समन्वयः. If elements create, then here elements are saying to say to be creating, elsewhere Brahman is said to create, ekavakyata, then the one single purport is not there. Therefore, na tatra brahmani samanvayah. Everything does not resolve into Brahman. That is Purva Paksha. Siddhante tu tayo ekvakyataya. Siddhanta says no, all of these statements say the same thing. They have the one single purport. Avirodhat, there is no contradiction. Pramanyat tat siddhi. So Shrutis pramanam deva tat siddhi. Brahmani samanvaya siddhi. Yet in Brahma alone, all samanvaya is there, consistency is there, ekvakyata is there. Then Nyayana is akashadeva samutpadyante iti evakara shrutya. Earlier we had the sutra akasha tallingat prana. So earlier discussions established that the word akasha that is used in Chhandogya Upanishad stands for Brahman. So 132, if you look at that sutra, 132. Oh. Not 32. Where are we? Page 134. Okay. 22, sorry. 1122. आकाश तल्लिंगात् इदम आमनन्ति अस्य लोकस्य का गतिः इति आकाशतो होवाच सर्वाणि हि वा इमानि भूतानि आकाशादेव समुत्पद्यन्ते. All these beings are created from Akasha alone. Akasham prati astamyanti. They again resolve onto Akasha. Akasho eva ebhya jayan Akasha parayanam. This was in the first chapter. Tatra samshaya kim akashabdena param brahma bhiyate uta bhutakasham. So by the word Akasha is meant Param Brahma or the elemental space, and then there is Akasha is Param Brahma. Okay? So now go back here. Purva Pakshe. No. Akashadeva samutpadyante. Akashat eva means what? Paramatmana eva. Akash means Paramatma. Akashadeva Paramatmana eva. From Paramatma only. Samutpadyante. All the beings are created from Paramatma only, not from anybody else. Id evakara shrutya brahmanah swatantre samadhigate. The Shruti clearly says that Brahman alone is the creator, none else. Bhuta swatantram ayuktam. Then how do you arrive at this conclusion that the elements are independently creating when earlier already is established that Paramatma alone creates? Shingati kutah. So we ask him, kutah. So on what basis do you say that elements create? So says Nyayana, Moola Karanatva Apekshaya Brahmanah Swatantra Shravnati Ashayavan Aha. Moola Karanatva Apekshaya. Brahman is Moola Karanam, but not subsequent Karanam. So Brahman is the cause of space, but then space is cause of Vayu. So Akashadeva, when it said from Paramatma alone the beings created, Paramatma is Moola Karanam, primordial cause, but not subsequent at subsequent stages. That's what the Purva Pakshi says. So Vashyakara says, Akashad Vayuhu Vayoho Agnihi Ityadi Swatantra Shravanat. Akashad Vayuhu says Taittiriya Upanishad, from space the air, from Vayu Agni. So it says. That's why we say that the elements independently create. Now going to Ratnaprabha, Samshaya Bija Anuktau Purvottar Pakshayuktayah Bijamiti Jnayam. When the cause of the samshaya is not stated, then the arguments, the reasoning advanced by the Purva Paksha and the Siddhanta, they provide you the cause of the seed of the samshaya. Nanu atra bhutanam kim swatantrena upadanatva ashankyate kartrutvam va. So now, when the Purva Paksha is questioning us, there is not Brahman that's the creator, who the five elements are the creator. What do you mean by that? Because cause can be twofold. One is Upadana Karanam, other is the efficient cause. So says, Nanu atra bhutanam kim swatantrena upadanatvam ashankyate. I was saying that each element is independently the upadanam, the material cause of this subsequent element. Is that what you mean? Kartrutvam va, or the efficient cause, each element is the kartru or the creator of the subsequent stage. Meaning, when you say that the elements create independently, do you mean that they are the material cause or the efficient cause? Says na adhyah rachana anupattehe ityadi nyaya virodhadi shankate. Look at Sutra 221. You know. That's on the page 412. Rachana anupattehe na anumanam. It's a long discussion, but I'll tell you what it means here. So the discussion there is Rachana anupattehe na anumanam. So what it means is this. The anumanam. You see, the Sankhyas claim that pradhanam is the primary, the material cause of the universe. The pradhanam, which is what? Trigunatmakam, sattvarajastamo gunatmakam, pradhanam, jagat, upadana karanam. Why is it so? Because in the Jagat we find Sukha Dukkha Mohatmaka Vastu Upadanakam. What is Jagat? It's made of three elements, Sukha, Dukkha and Moha. We find in Jagat Sukha happiness, Dukkha unhappiness, Moha delusion. Happiness indicates Sattva Guna, unhappiness Rajo Guna, Moha the Tamo Guna. The Jagat is then, we find that is made up of the three gunas. Therefore, its material cause also must possess three gunas. You follow? Because the qualities of the cause, they always flow into the effect. The cause and effect must be compatible. Therefore, mrudanvida ghatavata, so tat anvitatvad. The cause always flows into the effect. So we find that in Jagat, the three elements are there in the effect. So in the cause also, the three, not elements, the three gunas must be there. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, therefore pradhanam. Iti anumanam. By anumana, Sankhyas arrive at this conclusion that pradhanam, primordial matter, is the cause. This discussion keeps coming up again and again. So then Siddhanta says, Rachana anupattehe na anumanam. Rachana anupattehe. The design of this universe is cannot be explained. So why? Anupatti means there is no explanation. There is no explanation for Rachana, the design of this universe. Says Achetanat Srastavya Jnana Shunyat Pradhanat Anekavida Vichitra Rachana Anupattehe. Pradhana means primordial matter, which is insentient, does not have intelligence, therefore does not have the knowledge of what is to be created. And therefore it cannot be, Pradhan has no competence in fact to be the material cause of the universe. Because the cause must have the knowledge of what is to be created. But how about the Sukha Dukkha etc. you find in the universe? It says Sukha Dukkha Antarata. Is Sukha Dukkha within your mind? They are not out there. Jagat is not made of Sukha Dukkha Moha. They are all internal. So you can't say Jagat is Sukha Dukkha Moha. Your mind is Sukha Dukkha Moha, not Jagat. Therefore, na Sankhya Siddhanta pramanika hai. So this was done earlier, which is what the Ratna Bhakara here refers to. Going back to page 519. Now, Adhyaya. Already established that Pradhanam cannot be the material cause. Rachana Anupattehi Ityadi Nyaya Virodhat. In that Adhikaranam was already established that Pradhanam does not the Pradhanam is the primordial matter which is insentient, does not have the competence to be the material cause of the universe. Therefore we ask him, Nanu iti. The Bhashya says, Nanu acetananam स्वतंत्राणाम प्रवृत्ति प्रतिषिद्धा ननु अचेतनानाम स्वतंत्राणाम प्रवृत्ति प्रतिषिद्धा. Hey, wait a minute. Already it has been established earlier. Acetananam, those which are insentient. So, swatantranam, insentient thing cannot do anything independent of a conscious entity. The rule is that whenever you find an insentient or unconscious entity doing something, such as you see a chariot moving, then you know that a sentient or conscious being must be involved there, must be adhisthata, must be presided over by a conscious entity. Even if you see a motor, by remote control, looks like that little toy motor car is running by itself, but somebody is having the remote control in his hand, so it is presided over by a conscious being. Then only the insentient thing can function. So this is already established. Nanu acetananam swatantranam pravrutti pratisiddha. Already pravrutti or activity on the part of the insentient being has been refuted. Then why do you bring it up again? Then says the Ratnaprabha, in fact the same thing applies to both material cause and efficient cause. Na dvitiyaha acetanattvadi bhava. Really speaking, one thing I have to deliberate further. How do you say that the pradhanam cannot become the material cause? Pradhanam cannot become the efficient cause. Because you require chetanatvam in efficient cause. You don't require chetanatvam in material cause. So how the material cause has been, is refuted there is something to be further deliberated upon. Because rachana anupatte sastavya jnana rahitat. But sastavya jnana means the knowledge of what is to be created is required on the part of the efficient cause. The pot maker requires the knowledge of what is to be created, not clay. So why not pradhanam can become the material cause? So that, but anyway, kartrutvam cannot be there. Meaning that the insentient thing cannot be the creator. Acetanatvat iti bhavaha. Na dvitiyaha acetanatvat. That's okay. But why not pradhana material cause is dismissed because it's unintelligent, so it cannot make the it cannot become the material cause also. This is the argument there. Continuing with Ratnaprabha, yatha manusyadi shabdaihi tattad dehabhimanino jivaha uchyante yatha akashad vayu ityadi shrutau akashadi shabdaihi tattad bhuta अभिमानी देवताः उच्यन्ते तासां स्वकार्ये वायवादौ कर्तृत्व संभवात् निरपेक्ष निमित्तत्वं पंचम्यर्थः. Purva Paksha. What does Purva Paksha says now? When we say 5 elements, we mean the presiding deity. So when the Shruti says Akasha or Vayu, that Akash or the Teja had deliberated. And Apaha deliberated. When it is said, what is my Tejaha? The deity presiding over the Tejaha. Not Brahman, but the deity. The Devata says, Yatha manusyadi shabdaihi tattad dehavimano jivaha uchyante. So when you say Manusya, or Pashu or Pakshi. When you say this, what do you mean? You mean the Jiva. Who is Manushya? Manushya is a Jivatma having the human upadhi. Who is an animal? Again the Jivatma having that upadhi. Who is a bird? Is a Jivatma having that upadhi. So by those words, Tattad Dehavimano Jivaha Uchyante. You do not mean the body as Manushya. You mean the conscious being. The Jivatma is referred to as Manushya, having the upadhi of Manushya. When you say an animal, you do not mean just the body. You mean the conscious being, the Jivatma, having the upadhi of that animal. So similarly, Tata Akashad Vayuhu. So similarly, when the Upanishad says from space the Vayu was created, Akashadi Shabdai Tattad Bhuta Abhimani Devataha Uchyante. So what this Shruti means is not just the element space, but the Devata. The Abhimani Devata means what? The presiding deity of Akasha, presiding deity of Vayu. So they created. Tasam Swakarye Vayavadu Kartrutva Sambhavat. So the element space cannot create, but the deity presiding over element space can create Vayu. Purvapakshi says, element Vayu cannot create, but the deity presiding over Vayu can create the subsequent element. Therefore, Nirapeksha Nimittatvam. So Akashat Vayoho is what? Panchami. That Panchami is what? For Nimitta Karanam it says. Panchami can be both Upadana Karanam primarily really, but it is also interpreted as Nimitta Karanam. So fifth case also is Nimitta or sometimes. So fifth case also is a cause, So Lingad, etc. Therefore, that Akashad Vayuhu or Vayu Agni, that fifth case stands for Nimitta. What is Akashad Vayuhu means what? The deity presiding over the element space created the element air. Therefore, the Akasha is Panchami is Nimitta Panchami. Nirupeksha Nimittatva means what? That deity presiding over space independently creates Vayu. And deity presiding over Vayu independently creates fire and so forth. That's one. Second is what? This is what this, when it's Akashad Vayu Vayu Agni, then the interpretation is that the presiding deities are the efficient cause. That's one thing. Evam tadatmanam swam akurta. Then Taittiriya Upanishad says, tadatmanam swam akurta. That Parameshvara created himself by himself. You see? Atmanam means himself. Swayam by himself. So that Parameshvara created himself by himself. Meaning that Parameshvara created this whole universe by himself. So he is the creator. He himself became the universe. That shows that Brahman is the efficient cause, Brahman is creator and nobody else. They want to find contradiction. So one Shruti seems to say that the Devata created, other Shruti seems to say that Brahman created. Evam tadatmanam swam akodeti shrutau swayamiti visheshanat brahmana anyanapeksha sarvakatrutva sambhavat nirapeksha nimittatvam shrutam. Therefore, Swayamiti Visheshanat, that Brahman created by itself. Anyanapeksha, the Brahman does not depend upon anything else to create. So Brahman is the independent creator. So there, Brahmana means what? Parameshvara is the independent creator. Here, Tasam Nirapekshatvam, here the Devatas are independent creators. So look, your Shrutis are saying different things. One Shruti says the Devata created, other Shruti says Brahman created. तथा च मिथो निरपेक्ष ईश्वर भूतकर्तृ श्रुत्योः विरोधात्. Therefore, mytho nirpeksha, each one says Ishvara, one says Ishvara independently created, else says Bhuta or presiding deity independently created. Virodha, therefore, there is Virodha, the internal contradiction between these Shrutis. Na Brahmani Samanvaya, therefore, all of these do not ultimately Samanvaya, they do not culminate or result into Brahman. It is safalam, phala sahitam, purupakshamaha. So Purupakshi says this along with its result. Naisha dosha iti. So Bhashyakara says on the page 520, Naisha dosha. So that fault does not arise, meaning that your argument that the elements are insentient, therefore how can they independently created, that fault does not arise. So Bhashyakara continues, Tatteja aikshata ta आप ऐक्षन्त इति च भूतानाम् अपि चेतनत्वश्रवणात् इति. तत्तेजः ऐक्षन्त, that element fire deliberated. Taha apaha aikshanta, the element water deliberated. Iti bhutanapi, Shruti says that element fire deliberated. So what do we want? That water deliberated. So bhutanapi chetanatva shravanat. So looks like Shruti says that these elements independently deliberate and create. So Ratna was Bhutanam means what? Tat Abhimani Devatanam ityartha. So Bhutana api Chetana Shravanat means what? Tat Abhimani Devatanam api Chetana Shravanat. That not only Brahman is a conscious being, but all Devatas also are conscious beings. And therefore, Devatas being conscious beings, they have the capability of creating. So these statements appear to say that different Devatas created. So here, Ratnaprabha says that you have to imagine one Ekadeshi saying something. It's not stated clear, but you see, earlier we were told that in all the Adhikaranas, this is the scheme. That Purupakshi is there, Ekadeshi is there, then Purupakshi is there, then Ekadeshi is there, and then Siddhanta is there. But here is no Ekadeshi. So you imagine that Ekadeshi is involved here. So what will the Ekadeshi say? Ekadeshi will say that Brahmani Samanvaya, all of these have Samanvaya in Brahman. But how? One is primary, other is secondary. So Ekadeshi accepts one Shruti and wants to interpret other Shruti in a different way. Say this is Gauni, so we don't have to take it literally. So says here, यथा आकाशादि भावापन्न ब्रह्मणः सर्वोपादानत्वं तथा तद अभिमानी देवता जीव भाव आपन्न ब्रह्मणः कर्तृत्व यदि परंपरया ईश्वर कर्तृत्व श्रुति अविरोध है. So Ekadesi wants to find avirodha in his own way. यथा आकाशादि भावापन्न ब्रह्मणः सर्वोपादानत्वं, that Brahman is सर्वोपादानम, the material of all. Through subsequent stages, Brahman became Akasha, and that Upadanam for Vayu became Vayu, Upadanam for fire, etc. In that way, Brahman is Sarvopadanam, the material cause of all. Tatha, Tat Abhimani Devata, Jiva Bhavam Apanna Brahmana. Similarly, Brahman alone became that Devata, and Brahman alone became the Jiva. So that even though Devata created, Ekadashi says, Brahman alone has created ultimately. So therefore, Paramparaya, Ishvara Kartatva Shuddhi Avirodha hai. So it's not Ishvara, now whether Ishvara is directly Karta or Paramparaya Karta. The Purva Pakshi says Ishvara is Karta and Devata is Karta. So different Kartas are there. Ekadashi says Ishvara alone is Karta, but not direct, Paramparaya. But Siddhanta says Ishvara is directly Karta. See the difference here. Siddhanta says Ishvara alone it creates at every stage, not via media. Ishvara alone is the Karta everywhere, in each case, not through that Devata. But then the Ekadashi resolved this issue by Paramparaya. That Paramparaya, through subsequent stages, Ishvara alone is created, therefore there is no Virodha in the Shruti. We say no, Ishvara is directly the creator. So Mukhya Siddhanta iti Ekadashi Siddhanta Uhaniya. Similarly, we should imagine that Ekadashi also presents his position and that is being refuted by the Siddhanti. So Mukhya Siddhantama evam prapte. So Bhashyakara says, evam prapte abhidhiyate saeva parameshwarah tena tena atmana avatishthamaanah abhidhyayan tam tam vikaram srujati te evam prapte abhidhiyate. So when this situation, when this Purva Paksha and Ekadashi situation arose, then this is what the Siddhanti has to say. Saeva Parameshwara, not Parampara, Saeva, that Parameshwara himself directly. Tena tena atmana avadishtamana. So Parameshwara obtaining a space, Parameshwara obtaining as Vayu, Parameshwara obtaining as fire. Abhidhyayan. So when deliberation takes place, is not the fire or the deity of the fire, but Parameshwara as the self of the fire deliberates at each stage. Tam vikaram srujati, and creates the subsequent vikara or modifications. That's the Siddhanta. So says Nyaya Bhutanam Swatantra Shravanat Nasti Suvikara Sustau Ishwar Apekshayati Uktatvat Ukta Pratignya Anupattiri Shankate. Bhutanam Swatantra Shravanat. But Purva Pakshi says, wait a minute. The Bhutas are independent, we already told you. Nasti Suvikara Sustau Ishwar Apeksha. Therefore, these Bhutas or the deities do not require Ishvara for deliberation and creation. We already said that the independent doing it. So how do you make a statement that Ishvara does? We already said how the Bhutas are creating, and how do you make a statement Ishvara creates? Therefore, the question is asked, Kutaha. How do you say that? Sautram hetu madaya vibhajate. So sutra hetu. What's the hetu? Tallinga is the hetu. Sautram hetu. The hetu presented by Sutrakara. Tallinga. So Tallinga means what? By the indicatory mark, by the linga, by the evidence. Or going to Ratna Prabha, Akashadi Shabdaihi na Devata Lakshana. So what Purva Pakshi did is, when you say Akasha, when Shruti says Akasha, you should understand the Devata presiding over Akasha by Lakshana Vritti. So when it says Vayu, by Lakshana Vritti, you should understand the Devata presiding over Vayu. That's how Lakshana Vritti says Lakshana na Yukta. To take the Lakshana, to to interpret Vayu as presiding deity is not proper, because when the primary meaning is possible. So, Mukhyarthe Badak Abhavat, when Mukhyartha cannot be taken. When there is difficulty in taking the Mukhyartha or the primary meaning, then only you go for Lakshana. But here, right, you can take Akasha, Vayu in the primary sense anyway. So then Lakshana, in terms of Devata, is not proper. Panchamyascha Prakrutitvarthaha Tatra Rudataratvad. And the Panchami, in each case, is the material cause. Akashad Vayuhu, Vayuhu Agnihi. So Prakriti means the cause. Both cause, but mainly, so Tatra Rudataratvat. So Panchami is always in terms of the cause, material cause. That is where the Apadana Panchami. तथा च अचेतनानां भूतानां कर्तृत्वमेव नास्ति. Therefore, the elements that are insentient, they cannot be karta. If Vayu is taken as element, then achetana, then kartrutvam is not possible. You cannot take Vayu as devata. Vayu means Vayu, and then it is bhuta element, then it is insentient. So how can there be kartrutva? How can it be the prakriti? Kuta ishva anapeksha kartrukatvam. When they have no kartrutva, where is the question of independent creatorship, independent of Ishvara? How can they create? Yadyapi devatanam kartrutvam sambhavati. All right. Even if you take Lakshana Vritti and say that the devatas created, then also tathapi Ishvara niyamyatva shravanat. Even devatas also are not independent. Devatas also are controlled by Ishvara. Ishvara is the Atma of the Devatas also. And therefore, Mayaiva Vihitan Hitan. Lord Krishna says that Devatas seem to give the karma phala, but I in fact give the karma phala as a self. So even though Devata may be appearing to do something outwardly, but it is only controlled by Ishvara. So Ishvara is the Atma of the Devata, alone rules, alone does. Therefore, tathavi Ishvara niyamyatya shravanat chetananavi nasvatantram. Therefore, even chetanas, even the conscious entities as devatas are not independent. Kyu vacham achetananam bhutanam. So even if you take Lakshana Vritti, then also Swatantra is not there. When you take then the Mukhyartha, then these bhutas, elements are insentient. How can they be independent? Iti matva uktam tallinga. Therefore says tallinga. Okay, we'll conclude here. Continue tomorrow. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Krutau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah Ishvaro Gururatmedi Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo